Hello, everyone. Welcome to the C.S. Lewis Foundation's webinar series. We are delighted to welcome you today for our conversation with speaker David Bentley Hart on baseball, enchantment, and children's literature. We'd like to thank our donors who make today's webinar and all of the virtual and in-person gatherings possible. Thank you also to Matthew Clark and the Sweet Airs who wrote and performed the song playing as you joined today. I'm Amber Saladin, Arts and Ministry Director for the C.S. Lewis Foundation. This might be your first time joining us. You are very welcome. Allow me a moment to introduce you to the C.S. Lewis Foundation. Inspired by the life and legacy of C.S. Lewis, we encourage and equip Christians to live out our faith within the world of ideas and the arts. The goal is for our programs to produce spiritually equipped and culturally literate Christians who are transformative in whatever area they may be called to serve. We meet in person in multiple locations around the US and the UK, including Lewis's home in Oxford, The Kilns, which we own and operate as a study center. Our webinar series partners with our in-person events to provide community and engaging lifelong learning year-round. If you'd like to go back and watch some of our previous material, you can access that on our YouTube channel, as well as some of our in-person lectures from our previous conferences. So let's jump right into our discussion today, and let me pray for us as we begin. This prayer from the Orthodox Church of America. Join with me. O heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of truth, who art everywhere and fillest all things, treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and abide in us and cleanse us from every impurity and save our souls, O good one. Amen. At the C.S. Lewis Foundation, we are committed to engaging the soul as well as the mind, as art has a wonderful way of sneaking past even our own watchful dragons. Today, we thought we'd combine our love of poetry with David Bentley Hart's love of baseball and read a poem by John Updike. And I'd like to welcome to the screen with me, hello, Dr. Christopher Howell, Academic Director for the C.S. Lewis Foundation, who will read the poem for us.
All right, there we go. Thank you, Amber. Yeah, so this is John Updike's Dow in the Yankee Stadium bleachers. Distance brings proportion. From here, the populated tiers, as much as players, seem part of the show. A constructed stage beast, 3 folds of Dante's rose, or a Chinese military hat cunningly chased with bodies. Falling from his chariot, a drunk man is unhurt because his soul is intact. Not knowing his fall, he is unastonished, he is invulnerable. So too the pure man, pure in the sense of undisturbed water. It is not necessary to seek out a wasteland, swamp, or thicket. The opposing pitcher's pertinent hesitations, the sky, this meadow, mantle's thick baked neck, the old men who in the changing rosters see a personal mutability. Green slats, wet stone are all to me as when an emperor commands a performance with a gesture of his eyes. No king on his throne has the joy of the dead, the skull told Chuangzi. The thought of death is peppermint to you when games begin with patriotic song and a democratic sun beats broadly down. The inner journey seems unjudgeably long when small boys purchase cups of ice and distant as a paradise, experts, passionate and deft, hold motionless while Vera flies to the left. All right, so with that, I would like to introduce David Bentley Hart. I'm sorry that poem was about the Yankees and not the Orioles, but I figured that it was appropriate either way. Dr. Hart is a philosopher, religious studies scholar, translator, and most important, as I just mentioned, a Baltimore Orioles fan. He has written many books and articles, most recently two 2022 books, Tradition and Apocalypse and You Are Gods. He's also translated the New Testament, second of which was published in 2023. In addition to scholarly works such as Atheist Delusions, for which he was awarded the Michael Ramsey Prize, The Experience of God, and That All Shall Be Saved, Hart has also devoted time to fiction and creative nonfiction, writing the novel Kenogaia, the children's fairy tale The Mystery of Castle MacGorilla, which he co-authored with his son, and Roland and Moonlight, a memoir and dialogue with his dog Roland that was one of 2021's Books of the Year for the Times Literary Supplement. He also regularly writes for his substack, Leaves in the Wind. And I'll go ahead and put a link to that in the chat. So thank you, Dr. Hart, for joining us. We're very excited to have you. And may I be the first to say congratulations on the Orioles clinching the AL East. I think was it yesterday?
It was the day before yesterday, their 100th win as well of the season.
Yeah, So it's exciting to see how well they've done. And I wanted to talk about baseball in this interview in more than just a little detail, because it's something about your work that I've always been really interested in. Every year before spring training, I read your essay, A Perfect Game, which is some of my favorite baseball writing. And I was curious about if you could explain to our listeners and to those on the panel, but maybe those of us who aren't baseball fans, what is it that you see that's so special and different? You described it as being metaphysically superior to the quote unquote oblong game. And so maybe when you were talking to someone who maybe isn't necessarily a baseball fan, like Amber, for instance, how would you explain why what is so significant about it to you and why it matters so much?
Communicate with the invincibly ignorant. I my best. Well, when I said it was metaphysically superior, I don't want to give the impression that I'm ever being just a little bit facetious. And perhaps I was, but then again, I wasn't in that case. The oblong game, for those who don't understand the reference, is the name I gave to every sport that consists in two teams positioned at either end of an oblong field, trying to move an object into the other's goal or end zone or whatever analogous terminus is proper to that sport. So it would take in basically 9/10 of the sports of the world, team sports of the world. Which is all right if you see life as consisting in currents of contending opposed forces, but that doesn't have much in the way of metaphysical or aesthetic depth beyond that, obviously. Whereas with baseball, well, it's not a military clash between two sides that are trying to harm one another because they're wearing different color shirts. It's actually a game of strategy and of skill and of considerable grace, but it also has, unlike the other bat and ball games, like cricket, which I also am very fond of, it has a wonderfully platonic structure in the sense of being an egressus and regressus, an emanation and return. An odyssey, out from home through a sort of hero's journey of impediments and dangers and challenges, and then finally reaching home again. It's again the perfect game, perfect circle inscribed within a field of spiritual achievement.
Well, so
in any given well-played baseball game, there are moments of sheer grace that no other sport can match, not even a game like basketball, which has a great deal of speed and fluidity in it, but nonetheless has to be played by persons of abnormal physical build, repeating a fairly limited number of actions, whereas in any baseball game, you're likely to see something that you've never seen before, no matter how many thousands of times you've seen the game. So like all great art, it's always disclosing new dimensions of its possibilities.
I think, the capacity for baseball to have really funny, isolated, somewhat freakish things. I remember 10 years, I'm a Dodgers fan. I'm from Southern California, which maybe is, it's not as bad as being a Yankees fan.
A flash on our horizon.
Possibly. But they one time won a hitless game where they were not actually no hit because they were the home team, so they were only just no hit for 8 innings, but they managed to win. And that kind of weird, sort of strange.
When I was a boy, I remember the Orioles losing a no hitter that they had pitched.
Yeah, that kind of capacity for silliness too, and unusual humor and the kind of absurdity that can happen in baseball is very
well. That's too part of the story of coming home, isn't it? There's always the possibility of absurdity. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned you go to a game and you could see something you've never seen before, and the unusual grace it requires to do all 5 of the tools, right?
Or 6 if you're Shohei Ohtani.
That's actually what I was going to bring up. So there's been something that none of us have seen before in the last few years that even people who aren't baseball fans have been paying attention to, which is Ohtani. Unbelievable what he's been doing, but then also like how grief-stricken everyone was when he got hurt.
Yeah. And of course, immediately people began suggesting that perhaps he had exaggerated to himself the range of what the human body can do, because he wasn't giving himself recovery time from pitching. But to be honest, any pitcher can tear a UCL. It's the most common injury in the game, and it had happened to him once before. But yeah, no, he's set a new standard for accomplishment in the game that I actually don't think anyone will ever match. At least, certainly, if anyone does, it'll be again a figure like Shohei, someone who simply is almost superhuman in his range of skills. It's a very odd thing to see it happen in baseball, because sports physiologists rank baseball as, of course, the most difficult game to play well in every dimension, because the set of skills required is so diverse, more so than in any other sport. That's not to say it's the most physically taxing. It's not. You couldn't play 162 NFL games in a season. I don't think, but it's definitely physically the one that requires the strangest variety of grace and power and speed and agility and hand-eye coordination, and so for someone to be able to excel at all six, not just the five field player skills, but at all six of the chief skills of the game, and to play every game as well. Admittedly, DH somewhat lessens the burden there, but I mean, even Babe Ruth, when he pitched, didn't play the field in between the games he started. There was no DH in those days, and he just happened to be a pitcher who was a great pitcher who was also the best hitter on the club. But yeah, no, Ohtani makes me believe that many of the stories of the heroes of old in Greek myth or Mesopotamian myth or African myth or whatever myth, that such men did once walk the earth.
Yeah, it does feel like it seems like inhuman is the wrong word, but it seems superhuman, right? I mean,
yeah, superhuman, and let's admit it, it's annoying. Because he skills, he's tall and handsome and suave, and it's just he makes the rest of us feel just slightly less human. But
well, and he plays with so much joy too, which is something that's really a fun part of him.
Yeah, no, that is true. It's true. I'm amazed. Actually, the thing that amazes me most when I'm watching him, not necessarily the massively soaring home runs or the 101 mile per hour fastball on the corner. It's actually watching him run the bases, because he does it like a gazelle. I mean, he's moving as fast as among some of the fastest runners in the game, but he looks like he's just taking long, easy, loping strides when he does it. He'll steal without a slide half the time because he doesn't have to slide. He's an amazing specimen, and happily he plays the only game in the world worthy of his skills.
Well, so I want to get again to the moral meaning of that in a little bit, but we do have a comment from William Eiley. He asks a question about, isn't there some significance in the fact that baseball is not a game determined by time, and then hence the Yogi Bear quote, "It ain't over till it's over."
Oh yeah, no, I mean that's one of the most beautiful things about it. It is now we've had to install the pitching clock this year, because in order to bring the game back to being played at the speed that I was accustomed to watching it as a child, I have to admit that it was becoming unbearable to watch both pitchers and batters stop to write letters home between every pitch. It had become absurd. But that's not a time limit. That's simply a rational requirement that you play the game as though it's a sport rather than a picnic. So, but yeah, no, part of it is it's not just not determined by a clock. It has a certain timelessness to it. I think there's a feel to baseball. There are natural longueurs in it, and then moments of incredible speed and a complex physical motions. But all of it happens. It's not circumscribed by time, which is to say, by mortality, but by the eternal principles of the game. And it ain't over till it's over. Also, I think we've all seen games as a result that we thought were foregone conclusions, in which there have been miraculous comebacks. Something again that's simply, well, maybe when Patrick Mahomes is playing or someone almost, but even then, there comes a moment in any version of the oblong game when you know it's over and there are another 10 minutes to play. And you have baseball games that feel like that, but it's never really the case.
That happened this week with the Pirates.
Sure.
They had that. They were down by 9, I think, to the Reds, and then came back and won. You see a football team down by 100 points and then come back and win.
Several times this year with the Orioles. They're that kind of team. They'll suddenly score 8 runs in the 9th inning. It was just and in a very classic fashion too. It's not all the power game because they have plenty of power, but they moved the walls in Camden Yard back in left field to get away from a launch angle version of the game, and as a result, they play a very classical form of the game. They're not swinging it for launch angle, but for line drives. They're taking extra bases, stealing, using sacrifices. They've had more suicide squeezes this season, I think, than the previous 10 years. And it makes the game immeasurably more exciting. And I hope other teams see that the age of sabermetrics was an illusion. It was based on statistical illusions and that the game, when played in the beautiful and fluid and classic way it used to be played, actually leads to much better play. And they didn't win 100 games by accident this year.
Yeah, maybe kind of like the Polo Grounds having that like 450.
Yeah, and I don't mind places like Fenway Park where it's naturally a game where every game is going to be 13-10 half the time, because that's just a peculiarity. But when every park was being built that way and everyone was playing that way, it was getting fairly dull, at that point. I was being fair.
Sorry. One thing I'd like to ask, to transition to a little bit in some of the sort of philosophical rumination about the game, and I think link us to our conversation we want to have about children's literature that I know Amber especially has some questions she wants to ask. Sometimes you get criticism, not you, I mean the royal you, those of us who are baseball fans, there's certain criticisms that will pop up about it being like this overly mechanized thing, or it's part of a sort of economic infrastructure that compensates us for like the difficulty of our lives. It's the bread and the circuses, professional sporting events. And I was especially taken, one of the figures that has influenced me a lot is the historian of technology, Lewis Mumford. And I came across a writing of his, like from the Great Depression, where he was railing against professional baseball as being this sort of thing that acculturates and acclimatizes people to the industrial machine, essentially, as a sort of like professional sports is this accommodation. And I have to admit, I felt a little bit of the sting of that, even though my heart was not wanting to agree with him. And I was curious, if you've thought about something like that in regards to the professionalization, the monetization, the salaries, and it's just the way the Oakland A's owner has behaved in trying to move the team to Las Vegas, and so this kind of.
Well, that's always. That's been part of the history of the game for some time. That we always complain. As a Baltimore fan, I have the ultimate complaint. In 1901, the American League Orioles, which were the successors of the National League Orioles, the first great baseball dynasty from from the 1880s and 1890s especially, had been dissolved. The American League was inaugurated, and the Orioles were then moved to New York and became, I can't remember, some minor franchise. I was Knickerbockers and called something else later. I don't recall what. Yeah, no, I mean, but no, to be honest, as much as I like Lewis Mumford, you can become apocalyptic about the silliest things when you have an axe to grind, and he had a very large axe to grind. I mean, he was a brilliant critic of many aspects of late modernity, but he could, he could put his emphasis in odd places. Yeah. I have no problem with baseball players being remunerated at a ridiculous rate simply because I think I just wish that, the same sort of money was available to those who danced ballet, which I consider, because I put baseball in the same class. I regard it as one of the high arts of culture, one of the few that America developed, like jazz, that's worthy of being remunerated for those who can play it at a level of skill we can't. Maybe the salaries are absurd, but to be honest, there are many more sensible fixes we could have to our economic system that would bring about an end to poverty in a way that cutting Shohei Ohtani's next contract in half. So I don't worry about that. As for the mechanism, you see, I always take baseball to be just the opposite. It's a 19th century pastoral game that goes back, we now know, I mean, actually to a number of British village bat and ball games like stool ball and the adult versions that became the children's game rounders in Britain before cricket displaced them. These are pastoral games that have invaded the urban sphere and in a sense carve out a sort of a place that's not necessarily horribly commercialized and all that, but in another sense a place of community and refuge from the purely urban environment. They are basically, a ballpark is a park. There's that's a good name for it. We don't speak of other sports as being played at parks, but we do when we talk about baseball, because I think that we understand and A. Bartlett Giamatti, if you've ever read him, was quite good on this. The park is a word that goes back to Pardus or Fardus, paradise. That in fact it can be a supremely humanizing presence in the heart of the machine that in many ways defies the logic of the machine. Again, it's not on a clock. It's not an industrialized product meeting a deadline, in that way. It's not played one side against another in a sheer clash of force, trying to overcome material adversity. There's a poetry to the structure of the game, a narrative structure, and a beauty to it. And it's a sort of emanation from an earlier age that was not so thoroughly dominated by capital and advertising and all that. So yeah, on the one hand, I wish it were illegal to name a stadium after a brand name, and I wish you could get rid of a lot of the commercial rubbish that you have attached to it. But and do something to disrupt. But I have to realize it's not a perfect world. In a perfect world, there'd be only baseball.
Yeah, because it is the perfect game. Now, so to transition a little bit here, I mean, one of the things you've written about with baseball is that it has a sense of aching nostalgia, and what you've described here is very reminiscent of it as a childhood game, even culturally as a childhood game. I mean, for me, this is something I remember most vividly about baseball, is basically having a third grandfather in Vin Scully being the Dodgers announcer.
Well, it's so, you see, during a baseball, it's so continuous a part of your life because it's not just like, every Sunday, With football, people can wax nostalgic about, I'm from Maryland, and Johnny Unitas is practically a saint there. But it is different. I mean, with baseball, it was just part of the flow of life every day. You talk about Vin Scully. We had an announcer in Baltimore named Chuck Thompson. For you, horribly corny human being. One of the in a way that was just profoundly decent. It's the sort of thing you appreciate only when it's gone. When you're a kid, you're going, oh, I forgot. I remember he would do both the radio and television broadcasts. They would switch back and forth in those days. Of course, television broadcasts were a rarity, so you got most of your baseball through the radio.
Yeah.
And I remember, and in the new age of the better cameras, on which, in the 70s, you got a close up of an angry batter yelling at something at an umpire, and it was clear that the language he was using, but he wasn't yelling at an umpire. Sorry, he was yelling it at another player. It was clear that the language he was using was not chaste. You didn't have to be a great lip reader to figure out what he was saying. And Chuck Thompson, in that wonderful way he had breaking, he said, oh, well, he's calling whoever it is a hot dog. And go on, and ridiculously annotating and abridging and expurgating what we were all seeing with our eyes. But anyway, yeah, his voice, this sort of deep, resonant voice of this very, in some ways, very, very just decent and sometimes silly man, was very much a part of the texture of my childhood. I mean, I heard him every day for half the year, and in those days, I heard him quite a lot in the postseason too, because those in the great days of the Orioles, they were winning 98 to 109 in 69, 108 in 1970. So but it's also because the game is such a constant in that way. It unfolds as a narrative, and your childhood and your life is unfolding with it. The nostalgia has a different quality. It's not simply I was remembering the great team and how I cheered for Johnny Unitas. These people were part of your life. The Brooks Robinson was part of my life in a way that no football player ever could be.
Right. Yeah. I feel that way about some of the players I grew up, or even currently Clayton Kershaw, who's my age, is
Yep.
Watching him kind of flirt with retirement and stuff has been an interesting experience. But to go back to the childhood thing, I think that because I wanted to also loop in the questions we wanted to ask you about children's books. I mean, we're the C.S. Lewis Foundation. It kind of is a natural sort of question to ask about your own children's book, The Mystery of Castle MacGorilla, which actually I'll link in here.
The sequel is on the way. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we were going to mention that, but I thought there's a baseball connection with this too.
No, whenever you mention my fiction, I want you to go through every single title.
I can do it. Devil and Pierre Gournay. We can go back there.
Well, actually, I've got, I think, my best book. It's funny, I have two, both the children's book, the sequel to that, and another collection of stories coming out in the coming year, next year, that both, and the latter, I think, is just the best book I've written in any genre. So, but yes, you want to talk specifically about the children's fiction and Castle MacGorilla, which I happen to think is basically the War and Peace of children's literature. Well, no, maybe that would be The Wind in the Willows or the Alice books. But,
well, so Amber and I both were talking about it, and one of the things I think maybe to start off the conversation, I was associating with baseball just because of the nostalgia for childhood. I mean, when you're an adult reading a children's book, and we both read Mystery of Castle MacGorilla, you feel that a little bit. And one thing I've done when I was teaching is I had in one of my classes, I had my students write a fairy tale in order to try to learn how to help with writing and to help with thinking about religion and so on. And they all told me this is way harder than I thought it would be. And I was kind of wondering about your experience, and you co-authored it with your son, and what it was like to write such a different type of book.
Yeah, is that a fairy tale? I mean, it's a silly book. I mean, the novel Kenogaia is more a fairy tale in the classic sense, even though it's written for older readers than that. Fairy tale, I think of as a very specific genre of the sort. George MacDonald was a master, and that's a very difficult thing to do well, because you have to combine extraordinary simplicity with a really exquisite sense of proportion, but also with a kind of profundity. There's no such thing as a good, unprofound fairy tale. Because the genre itself is an invitation to retreat into a sort of dream dimension, not only of childhood, but I think of humanity as such, the same world that myths come from, perhaps, and dreams, but to do it in a way that also has a lightness of touch and that also, I mean, most fairy tales, most of the great ones have a certain area of darkness in them, artfully, not entirely concealed, but done in such a way that a child can handle it without being shielded from it. And all these elements in the best, and that's why that's what a fairy tale also to me is not necessarily always a children's genre. I mentioned George MacDonald, but his Lilith and Phantastes are every bit as much fairy tales as the Princess and Curdie, or Princess and the Goblin, or the Light Princess, or any of those wonderful The Wise Woman, And I think it's one of the profoundest of genres in a certain sense. It's not the literature of personality. That's not the point. It's not psychological portraiture, but it's perhaps a way into something deeper than the transient and accidental aspects of character that we think of as our psychologies. That they touch on something deeper in us and in the reality as humans, as spiritual beings, we share. Now, as for Castle MacGorilla, that was matter just of something else. That was, that was just entering into a world of absurd imagination that my son and I had shared when he was a small child, and made up games that he would play with his toys, with his toy animals. But we found out that having played those games, that the toys had naturally acquired the personalities he'd given them as a child, and so the story more or less told itself at that point. It was this new one, of course. We wrote that he was 11 when we did that. But it was some years before we published it. So now we've written a sequel with him at the age of 23. The odd thing is that he can take over aspects of the book that were entirely in my sphere earlier, passages of prose. So, and strangely, we write very much alike. I can't say why. Going off on a tangent, that's not really what you asked.
I want to. I love this idea of writing stories with your children, and my own husband has written, little ditties with our children about rats in Central Park, because we live in New York, and so that's what's available to us.
And you have to write about the charming fauna.
Yes. Okay.
So,
I will pass that on. But
now there's a pastoral scene, the shepherdess out with her flock of rats in Central Park. Nothing strokes the chords of the heart, I think, more poignantly than that.
We're trying to get rid of the rats, but if we could get a Pied Piper to do that, that would be amazing.
That's the only way in which it would be acceptable to do so.
Yes, and straight into the river. What I'm wondering is, as the mother of a writer, you're looking at George MacDonald, and you're looking at Lewis Carroll, and you're looking at these great writers. How did you deal with comparing yourself as a writer to them? Obviously you have a sense of an ideal children's book. Did you live up to that? And
well, I don't have an idea of an ideal children's book. I have an idea of certain ideals, which I think that the book lived up to. One of them is not to presume that children are stupid. I don't know why it is. I mean, when I was a child, and this is true of all of us when we're children, we have an extraordinary capacity to absorb new things, new words, new images, new jokes. And so, as a child, reading The Wind in the Willows, it wouldn't have occurred to me to think, well, this is a or even Watership Down. I mean, to give a later example, it wouldn't have occurred to me to say, this prose is much too sophisticated for me. As a child, I was being borne along on it and learn, and my world, my linguistic as well as my imaginative world, was expanding with it. In children's publishing today, it's getting very hard to get away with anything that doesn't fall within a reductive pattern in which you're supposed to write for a certain age group. And that age group is defined according to a scale of illiteracy, to be honest. I mean, it's assumed that they come from inarticulate, illiterate backgrounds, practically, given what the average. If you would see what the publishing standards are for books for 8 to 10, they want you to write something in language that, frankly, you should have gotten past at 4 or 5. But also the notion that you write for an age, or that you write for a bracket, or that you write down to children. Children are, I mean, all right, there are natural differences in intelligence, but I swear to you that most stupid adults are stupid because they were taught to be stupid by parents who didn't let them. I mean, the mind expands the brain. It doesn't work the other way around, to be honest. There is such a thing. It's real neural plasticity. We are spirit before we are flesh. And the simple fact is that, so one of the ideas of the book is it's written, I mean, it's not a difficult thing to read, but we didn't write it in a condescending voice. Neither book is. And all the nicest responses, we've gotten lots of responses from parents, but lots of children. I mean, the nicest letters we've gotten from the book, young children who, as soon as it had been read to them, wanted it read to them again because they liked the characters. And they weren't at all daunted by the book actually containing the occasional semicolon or polysyllabic word. So there's that. I mean, the idea, I think that we've ruined children's literature in the past several decades. That the reason that there's nothing like a Wind in the Willows on the horizon is if you were to present that to any publisher today, even the most adventurous, he or she would just think that this is impossible. You couldn't possibly, publish this for children. But also, I mean, I think that one ideal is that ultimately my rule would be that kindness is actually a triumphant virtue. So, I mean, that's one of the things that I would hope good children's books, and I do believe that I like to think that the character of Gorilla is a true hero of the spirit in that regard. He's not a genius, I'll admit.
Okay, but that's what makes him lovable, right? And friendly.
Yeah, I can't give away the ending of the book, but I mean the ending, which was, of course, the ending that made perfect sense to us. Actually, that came as a surprise to a lot of people, the way he dealt with the issue. But you say, well, don't you understand? He has a pure heart,
Well, actually, that leads me to my next question, which is about moralism in children's literature and how didactic they are. So
one of my chief complaints.
Oh, tell me more. Tell me more about it. How did you get away from purely teaching about kindness into telling a story about why does it matter? Why does
kindness isn't a moral lesson. It's a state of the soul, and you can convey it without trying to make it a regime of instruction. There's nothing more horrible than, I mean, my favorite children's books of all time, of course, are Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. I can't think of two less didactic. In fact, all the adult characters in the books who are morally peremptory, usually in pursuit of principles that make no sense whatsoever, are absurd. Whereas, Alice, who's anything but sweet. She's not sweet. She's not wicked. She's not cruel, but she's not sweet. She's actually a very sharp-tongued at times and very slightly judgmental young girl. She nonetheless can see how absurd they are, even though she's too young to be able to formulate the absurdity. And to me, though, if what one values in children's literature is lessons in how to live, I would say the Alice books are very successful in that. Because they're wonderful warnings against pomposity and self-importance and stupidity, without at any moment descending to either preaching or to saccharine goodness. She never turns into achingly sweet. Unfortunately, he wasn't when he wrote the Sylvia and Bruno novels, he wasn't able to maintain that pure detachment. So, even Homer nods. But in the Alice books, I think, you've got the perfect entertainment for clever children.
Yes. David Moses here is asking a question. Have you ever considered writing in the comics medium? And are there any comics that you've read that you find valuable?
I can't stand comic books. I hate that. Sorry. I mean, as a kid, I tried once or twice to read them. I just thought they were incredibly dull. And ugly. They just didn't have it for me. From an early age, I got hooked on longer books and on books on myth and Arthurian legend and things like that. So the world of comic books to me is just, or manga or graphic novels or whatever they call them now. I just wish it would go away. I'm afraid.
My children have reported the same thing. They do not like the Wrinkle in Time graphic novels. They do not like even
your imagination is. I mean, you illustrate it ruined. A Wrinkle. I mean, as those books go, of course, only the first one is any good. A Wrinkle in Time. The other four they get progressively worse. But A Wrinkle in Time is brilliant, but you have to let your imagination build the alternate worlds, and there's no way of depicting them that isn't a reduction of the mystery, that whatever it is that makes that book work, and it does.
So you've talked to us about the Alice books. You've talked to us about your other favorites, which is Wind in the Willows, and you like A Wrinkle in Time. For people who have children in their lives that would like to get them a book that would inspire their imaginations, do any others come to mind?
Oh, well, I mean, there are plenty of others. The preponderance of them produced by the English for some reason, or the Scots, in the case of George MacDonald. For some reason, the British have always had a peculiar genius for children's fiction, because somehow it's not, if you read, now, of course, this could just be my cultural prejudice in that I'm of pan-British ancestry, and I'm very much East Coast British diaspora, so that's the culture I grew up in. So maybe the kind of grim and horrifying children's stories that the Germans excelled at, or Southern Italian culture. But I mean, or frankly, even the Scandinavians, people who give their children Hans Christian Andersen should be tried for child abuse, because there's such a sadistic and weird sensibility in Hans Christian Andersen. There are moments of beauty, but some of the cruelest, most horrid stories. But the British, I always thought, the Winnie the Pooh. I mean, the A.A. Milne. I mean, these perfect. Okay, both Winnie the Pooh and the House of Pooh Corner, and the two books of poems for children. Those were part of the bedrock of my childhood, and they're absolutely perfect. And you should get those early in life, again, because Pooh Bear, like Gorilla, and I won't say that Gorilla was partly inspired by Pooh Bear. But, of course, in America, we have countless sins to atone for in relation to these books, all of them perpetrated by Disney on our behalf. shield your children from the Disney Winnie the Pooh. That is an evil thing. Never let them watch those damned cartoons. Never let them watch the
I've never seen them.
Oh, you're so fortunate. There's abominations. I mean, and especially don't let them see the Disney version of Alice in Wonderland, for which at this very moment Walt is burning in hell. He will get out. You know, I'm a universalist, but right now he's suffering. He's suffering. I would say 20 million years. Well, okay.
I was going to ask how long you thought he had to
At least, well, I think Rabbi Akiva said that no one can inhabit the Gehenna more than 11 months. So I'm going to say 11 months for Walt was the sentence. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. But the thing is that I think America, yeah, I mean, at its best, I mentioned the Wind in the Willows as well. That's you have to be a little older. But no, again, children will pick up the language very quickly. If you want your children to be very literate and perhaps to speak well, you could do far worse than giving them Wind in the Willows followed by Watership Down. You know, I would. You've taken me off guard in that I probably, in the back of my mind, have a long list of individual books that it would occur to me to recommend. Mm. And I know I'm talking to the C.S. Lewis Society here, so I should say something nice about the Narnia books. So I would say The Silver Chair is a masterpiece. I'm not so crazy about all of them. I mean, I like the first half of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but the second half, it's just so ham-handed an allegory, you know, that it just doesn't work for me. I mean, you might as well just have done away with the lion altogether and just, you know, told the passion narrative because it's so unsubtle. But the first part with the White Witch and the Turkish Delight and the Wardrobe, that's wonderful stuff. And the Voyage of the Dawn Treader is a wonderful collation, so to speak, of all those medieval, like Odo and John Mandeville and all the things that Lewis knew so well, and that but The Silver Chair is a masterpiece. That's one of the great works of children's literature in English. I mean, it's the perfect Christian Platonic fable. And again, you see, there's darkness there, as I say, but it's not because he was English. He didn't turn it into this weird German brutality in which someone's legs were cut off or something. You know, it was just, so it's. Yeah.
You've given us.
Oh, you know, actually, I'll say among American writers, I did. When I was a kid, I very much liked the Oz books. There were 21 or 22 Oz novels. They're inferior.
I don't like them.
The funny thing is, they're inferior. When I went back to them, I thought, well, they're not as good as I remembered them. But at a certain age, when I think I was about 7 or 8, one of them, especially Ozma of Oz, which I think is the fourth or fifth, was or maybe it's the third. I don't remember. It's been a while. I haven't been 7 for, you know, half a century or more, but that was okay. But honestly, the best children's literature traditionally and for many years is, and then of course, most of the great literature of human history, in a sense, always was already children's literature, because once they have that, induct them into the world. You know, Homer. Mm-hmm. Arthurian legend, Gilgamesh. I mean, you know, when they're old enough to handle the themes. The world of myth that opens up also is the world that will lead into Ariosto and Boiardo, and every child at some point should be taken to a good performance of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Not only because it's the apotheosis of English lyric verse, in which every age of English poetry, even ages that had not yet come in Shakespeare's time, like the Romantic era, are all already there present. So they're hearing the most perfect collection of lyric verse ever compiled. But, it's a story of fairies. It's a story of classical Athens. It's wonderful. I consider that a great work of literature for children. And they can understand what's going on from about the age of 8 or 9, you know.
Mm-hmm. You've given us just the perfect segue, Dr. Hart, by mentioning the Silver Chair, because we are having a conference in just a couple weeks an in-person conference in Texas, and the theme is around the silver chair. I think our president, Stephen Elmore, is going to come on and talk about that for just a couple minutes, tell us about some things in store, and then I will turn it back to you and Christopher.
I'd be happy to. Hi, David, Amber, and Chris. It's wonderful to have you all with us. And David, thank you so much for joining us today. I do want to say thank you personally for your book, Doors of the Sea. It helped me a lot in my life after my son died, actually. So I owe a debt to you for that. So thank you there.
Sorry.
I have several announcements today that I'd like to make. We have a lot going on at the foundation this year and in the next 2 years. But first, I'd like to thank all of our partners and volunteers who have made this webinar possible. It's because of your generosity that we're able to shine a light on speakers who are Christians living the legacy of C.S. Lewis in higher education, ministry, and the arts in various ways. If you'd like to support these webinars or the work of the foundation in general, please consider joining us by making a gift today through our website, cslewis.org. So on to the events. We have several events coming up this year and next. Amber just mentioned the Texas retreat near Houston in just 2 weeks from now. We'll be there on Saturday celebrating. And the theme is Remember the Signs, Faith, Knowing, and the Real in the Silver Chair. And this year is the 70th anniversary of its publication. It's also the 125th anniversary of Lewis's birth and the 60th anniversary of his death. So a lot of round numbers there. So this should be a very special event. For those of you that can't make it in person, we are offering a live stream option. We would love for you to join us. And I think, Joshua, you're going to get that link up for the live stream option if anybody wants to register for that. We're also announcing for the first time today that we're having launching for the first time a C.S. Lewis Writers Conference in May 2024, so next year. We're partnering with Cultivating Oaks Press to host the event in Colorado Springs. The theme is Cultivating a Writer's Life. Speakers include Sally Clarkson, Jonathan Rogers, Lancia Smith, and Steve Lobby. We're also going to be hosting our 2024 C.S. Lewis Summer Seminars. That's the week-long kind of small group, 15-person seminars that happen at the Kilns, Lewis's home in Oxford. And that's going to be with C.S. Lewis scholar Jerry Root, and that will be next July. Beyond that, we're hosting a C.S. Lewis conference in October 2024 in Amherst, Massachusetts. And finally, beyond that, our big every 3-year C.S. Lewis Summer Institute. It's a week-long, 2 speakers every morning, artistic performance every evening, worship services on the front and back end of it. That's going to be in Belfast, Northern Ireland in July 2025. So we're excited to officially announce that we are going to Belfast for sure. This is the first verbal announcement we've made for just about all of these, except for the Texas event. So if you'd like any details, we are going to stick around after the webinar to answer questions about any event or what's happening at the foundation for anyone who's interested. And just kind of simply stick around after the webinar is concluded, and I and a few others will be there to answer questions. And that includes dates, details, speakers, whatever we plan so far. So we're not going to have discussion groups after this time. So we'll be answering questions about the foundation. And that's all I have. So back to you, Chris, Amber, and David.
And I'll be playing here all week. Oh, sorry.
There might be a little noise in the background. It's our dog's dinner time. I don't know how Roland gets, but around dinner time, it's a little, they get angry.
Gets angry so much as he becomes disappointed.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was going to ask what Roland's thoughts about baseball were, since that's something I think that's been missing from some of our conversation. I have pretty strong opinions about a game with a ball and a stick, but
yeah. I mean, what dog wouldn't love it? I mean, even it's not necessarily as reflective as Roland. Before I answer that, let me say one interjection here. I talked about how fairy tales are not necessarily always children's genre. Till We Have Faces is a good example of a true fairy tale. I mean, it's based obviously on Cupid and Psyche from Apuleius, but there's a good example of what I was talking about earlier. I did read that maybe perhaps a little too early the first time I read it. I think I went right from Narnia to Till We Have Faces. And I had to go back and read it again a couple of years later. But anyway, so yes, Roland and baseball. I curiously enough, on matters philosophical, metaphysical, aesthetic, our tastes coincide with extraordinary regularity. I don't know why it is. We just seem to be on the same page.
Well, he's your teacher.
He is. I've learned a lot from him. There's no question. We're both for our species. We're both getting on in years, so we've sort of converged into overlapping personalities. Perhaps I know every time I'm scratching behind my ear with my right foot that this is probably a habit I picked up from him. Because it's rather awkward.
Regarding children's literature, one thing I do want to mention that was it was amusing to me. My favorite character in MacGorilla was Cuddles. I think he was. I had a special feeling, and I also had a weird correlation because I happened to be reading Moby Dick for the first time when I was also reading MacGorilla. So when the squid shows up in Moby Dick, and it's this ominous sort of, foreboding presence, it just naturally seems like, oh, this is Cuddles. He has appeared here to show.
Right. Is hearing that name correctly? Cuttles, as in cuttlefish.
Right.
Though he's a squid, the cephalopod reference somehow got attached to him when he was a toy of my son's, but it's not Cuddles. Don't want to give the wrong impression. He's
right, yeah. Sorry, I mispronounced it. Yeah, with the emphasis on the T, Cuddles, like a cuttlefish.
Well, you weren't mispronouncing it. I just want to make sure that everyone's ears were. Yeah. Well, in the sequel, the main four, Teddy, Gorilla, Porciolina, and Rolandus are present again, but otherwise it's another cast of characters. Now, there's a third book on the way in which several of the characters, and Cuddles will definitely be returning for that one. But I think in the new book, the two, I'll give you an advanced taste of this. The two most affecting creatures. One is a poet, not a playwright, a small iridescent toy dinosaur named Rex, Homerosaurus. My son called him Homerosaurus. I think it was one of his first jokes. And then an emperor penguin named Auguste, who to my mind is a truly tragic figure. I mean, at least a figure of tragic dignity. I mean, I feel that there's something about the abyss of both despair and dawning hope with Auguste. Yeah.
What is the expectation of the timeline of the sequel?
Well, I think it'll be out before Christmas. All the book's been done for several months. It was just waiting on the illustrations, and they're done now. Some of them quite brilliant. So, I mean, ideally it should be out before Christmas, but who can tell? I mean, production schedules being what they are. Yeah. But soon, and it will flash across the firmament like a great new, I was going to say comet, which doesn't really flash. They kind of hang there in the heavens, but you know what I mean.
Well, we will be looking forward to that. And I think to wrap up here, we've got two questions, one about baseball and one about the silver chair that I thought we would ask as we conclude here. So one is from Michael Sutherland. He says, I also love the silver chair. One of my favorite scenes is when the Green Witch debates Puddleglum. Actually, Cuddles and Puddleglum remind me of each other a little bit, about various modern views of apathy and skepticism. This seems very much like a didactic section of the tale, and I appreciate that Lewis trusts his young readers with the complexities of a didactic argument in the same way that you mentioned artists trusting children with the complexities of language and art. Do you like the scene, or do you see it as didactic or not? I was wondering what you're reading.
It's done with a sufficiently light touch that it doesn't tip over into ponderous didacticism. It comes a little close. I mean, that's Lewis is interesting in that regard. On the one hand, he's a full-bore Christian Platonist. If you actually look at his real theology, he's very much someone of who knew the church fathers somewhat, but knew the deeper tradition, was very much also familiar with 16th century and 17th century Platonic revival in Christianity. And so, on the other hand, there's that Ulster Protestant background, the preacher, who at odd moments will slip out and be a little bit moralizing and a little bit dictatorial. And that Lewis I could do without, but that luckily is not he does. The silver chair, I think, holds his own, especially since Puddleglum becomes such an eloquent adversary to the witch. I can imagine a world that licks yours clean, or whatever. Is I've always thought a profound moral argument. If you not just a philosophy, but a theology that you can imagine improving upon, then you should abandon your theology. Because there's something wrong if you actually think that your moral imagination is richer than God's. Yeah.
That's a powerful reading of that. We'll have to talk about that at the conference. One last question from Stephen Bushell is he has a friend from Japan and her daughter who is crazy about baseball, and he was wondering if
Japanese baseball culture is a glorious thing.
Yeah, well, that's what he wanted to ask: is what about it makes it like that? Why is it so? I mean, we saw the World Baseball Classic was this incredible thing between the U.S. and Japan in the final. Why is it so?
I think it is the only major sport played. I mean, it doesn't have rivals in the same way here. I mean, there are other team sports, but nothing that occupies the cultural center the way baseball does. It's the way baseball was in America up until about the 50s, and then it began to shift. And the NFL, which to my mind, I think American football is, a profoundly stupid game. I mean, it's tactically complicated, but any game that's 1 hour on the clock that takes 3.5 hours to play is an assault on the spiritual dignity of the whole race. This is silly. And to say that it has flowing action, and NFL fans who tell me that it's more exciting than baseball. Well, yeah, there are more bones broken in any given game. I mean, if that's your measure of excitement. But in Japanese baseball culture, yeah, I mean, there's what I love about it, and I guess your questioner may know also that one of the things that I'm fascinated with inside the Japanese language and literature and aesthetics is that they approach it with the same sort of it's both vulgar and high culture. Japanese vulgar culture is ridiculous. I mean, it's absurd. The sort of game shows they watch. I mean, they were willing. People talk about Japanese culture as very proper and restrained, but they're willing to go insane in ways that would embarrass, the football fans who paint themselves blue. But also high culture is the way the game is played is with, an exquisite sense of the artistry of it, of the discipline, of doing everything. If Shohei Ohtani went to a school that, aside from the academic curriculum, was all about baseball, and they recognize this a perfectly good and honorable way to be educated because it teaches you more than simply the physical skills. There's an ethos to the game, a sort of being responsible, being part of a community, being selfless. One of the things, the World Baseball Classic, I love because of the different cultures. Because in the major leagues, everyone's mixed together, and they're all having a good time. But when you see the different, like the Dominican, and I love the fact that in baseball, the Dominican Republic is a superpower. I mean, to me, that proves right there that it's a morally superior game to any rival. Is the difference between the Japanese players and the Dominican players celebrating you see the vast cultural difference, and they're both beautiful. I mean, on the one hand, it's just pure festival. On the other, it's sort of calm, responsible self. Don't call attention to myself, and you can appreciate the richness of both. But the first time the Japanese team was eliminated and didn't make it to the championship because they won the first two, as you may know. They came out along I think it was the third base line. The whole team turned, bowed very politely to everyone in the stadium, then turned and bowed to everyone in the stadium, took off their hats, thanking them for having come. and walked away. And I thought, my God, how nice it must be still to have a civilization. There's a sense, of the aesthetics of the game that I think has persisted also. So it's not just they have the most festive baseball game. They're loud. I mean, a Japanese baseball game is loud. They beat things together. But they also, but also there's it's approached in the same way that the Japanese culture at its best approaches gardening, or any other things that we think of as marginal to life. The Japanese culture still at its best recognizes as actually central. So I have no better explanation than that, but I am a great admirer of many aspects of Japanese baseball culture, and not least, just again the sheer when you saw their approach to the Japanese approach to the game played with exquisite virtuosity. Say, Ichiro, Suzuki, before we saw Otani, who's just from a different universe, you could see just the artistry that he was an artist who understood what he was doing as an art.
And I was even impressed with the pitching, the way that they would all use the split finger. It was very much almost like a cultural thing that this was.
Yes, the split finger fastball is as I understand it at present, basically what in every version of baseball, different pitches go through periods of dominance. Right now, the sweeper and certain kinds of slider, and still, of course, more and more the changeup is used as a strikeout pitch. When I was a kid, the changeup was a weak contact pitch, so it was always up in the zone, and at some point, pitchers discovered actually if you disrupt the timing of even a great hitter, the changeup has enough movement to be a better strikeout pitch sometimes than a high fastball. So, and the split finger fastball is almost obsessively studied and trained and practiced in Japanese baseball right now.
Well, so we're just about out of time, so I'm going to have one last final
boundless topic. All right,
I know. We'll just have to have another webinar that's just baseball, and that's the only title, nothing else, just a picture
yes.
of them. But I want to end with, I think, maybe the most important question in the immediate future. I know that your heart says Orioles in October. Is that also what your head says, or does your head say something else?
Yeah. No, yeah. The Braves look unbeatable. So did the '69 Orioles. And I learned that there are times when a team is magic. The '69 Mets were nowhere near as talented as the Orioles, and yet they won pretty easily against what's generally reckoned as one of the 10 greatest teams ever. And as good as the Braves are this year, there's nowhere near so great a gap in talent. The Orioles, I would say, top to bottom, are actually the better team because they have more variety of what they can do and more players who can do it. The Braves have a great number of really talented hitters, but they rely on the home run. They've only got one player, Acuna, who really plays the game the way that is played in Baltimore. And I think, even though they have home field advantage, I think the Orioles definitely, I would give them if they get to the World Series and they face the Braves, I would say about 60% chance that the Orioles would take it. If they face the Dodgers, I'm not so sure. Because of course the Dodgers are evil, as you know. No, because
I don't have as much confidence in them as someone who's watched them for 30 years.
Because it's so hard to play, is anything can happen in a short series. And I know that they may get eliminated in the divisional round and all that. But for those who haven't been watching, the Orioles are just a beautiful team to watch this year. I mean, it's all speed and grace and drama and everyone contributing unexpectedly. There's not one central guy ever. It's just excellence from top to bottom, played at breakneck pace. I mean, they just play the game at a different speed than everyone else. And so people should hope that they get... They have fans of other teams, but they should hope to see them in the World Series because it could be a very exciting championship.
I think you'd get many that would agree. I mean, an Orioles in the championship would mean no Astros. No, like a lot of teams that people don't want to see that they would much rather.
Aside from the moral odium that still somewhat attaches to a few of the players, I find them a supremely boring team. I mean, I'm sick of launch angle teams. I mean, the 1990s, I think, and they're still, I think, caught in the analytics. Analytics took over, and so the game began matching the statistical model, and so the statistics seemed more and more to be true because people were playing to the statistics, altering their swing, going for the 3 true outcomes. But it's an inferior style of play, and I think that's the Orioles this year vindicated classic baseball tactics.
Well, I wish them good luck in the playoffs. I would be happy to see the Orioles win.
They have to win it all for Brooks.
Yeah, right. I mean, they got the Brooks Robinson thing. I would love to see the Dodgers, but I don't have a lot of confidence in it. And we'll see. It should be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
I hope we get there. It's been a while. For someone who grew up with the Orioles when no one could beat them, it's been a hard 4 decades.
No, that's true. I can't complain too much. The Dodgers won 3 years ago. It's just, it feels like they should have done more than they've done. But yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. That was a ton of fun. I am an obsessive baseball person, so this has been a joy for me to talk to you about it. And
thanks for giving me an opportunity, because people always want to talk about other things too.
And
for topics, literature and baseball, or the arts and baseball, but yeah, literature.
We appreciate you showing up. It was a lot of fun. We'll go ahead and let you go and conclude here. Those of you that had any questions, you can stay on and ask us about them, but we'll go ahead and dismiss Dr. Hart. But thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
I will leave then. Take care. Thank you very much.
Godspeed.